Well, aloha and welcome to Hawaii. We're going to talk about something interesting today that not a lot of people think about. Most of the time we think about music education as a fairly recent art and music educators as fairly recent people. Little did we know that when we were growing up and talking about various Bible stories, whether we're religious or not, from the floods and Noah to crossing the Red Sea with Moses, to even to Jesus dying on the cross, that some of these characters had very specific roles to play in the foundation of our music history and the foundation of our music education. As we move on through the Bible, we find this interesting character called Moses. Most of us have heard the story about Moses, but I want to recap real quick. Moses was born to a Hebrew woman. At the time, the Hebrews were enslaved in Egypt. And during that time, the Pharaoh had decided that he wanted to murder all the firstborn of the Hebrews. You see, the Hebrews were flourishing more than any other people in the world, really, and it was a threat to the Egyptians. So Moses' mother had decided, in order to save her child, to put him in the Nile River. Moses floated through the Nile River, and oddly enough, Pharaoh's daughter was the one who found him. So she started to care for Moses and realized that Moses needed to be nursed, and sent out a petition to the Hebrew women, knowing that he was a Hebrew by his characteristics, that they needed somebody who was able to nurse him. Well, lo and behold, it ended up being Moses' mother who nursed him. So Moses' mother, regardless of what she had done in the past, and maybe even thinking that she wasn't going to see her child anymore, was the one who raised him. Of course, Pharaoh didn't know that. Pharaoh's daughter didn't know that. But she raised him the way that a Hebrew woman would have raised her son, as discreetly as she could. Well, as Moses grew up, he would have understood the musical practices of the Egyptians, the quirkiness of the Egyptians with their magical practices and all of the other wonders that they did whenever they were flourishing as a civilization. As he grew up, knowing that he was a Hebrew down in his heart, he noticed that one of the Egyptians were beating one of the Hebrews, and so Moses ended up killing that Egyptian and fled Egypt. He was out wandering the desert for several years, and eventually came to a burning bush. It's not a singing burning bush like we see in the Three Amigos, but it's a burning bush. And through that burning bush, God talked to Moses, told him to go back to Egypt and set the people free. And Moses reluctantly did that because Moses was hard of speech. He stuttered a lot, and ultimately needed some help with that. God provided him whatever he needed. Moses went back to Egypt and challenged Pharaoh. And I know a lot of us have heard the stories about plagues of frogs and locusts and killing of the firstborn Egyptians, etc. And after that happened, the Israelites fled Egypt. Well, they thought that they were free, but then Pharaoh and his army followed them, and eventually drowned in the Red Sea. So now that brings us to Exodus 15, where here it is, the Israelites are drowning in the sea, and Moses and his sister Miriam had decided to sing a song. And it's one of the first songs ever written in the Bible. The song talks about praise to God, and it talks about how that they were delivered from Egypt. What's interesting about the song is that the song was supposedly done antiphonally. First off, it was written in 3 strophes. Second, there was a call and response, the antiphonal portion of the song, where Moses or the men would sing praises to God, and then the women, followed by Miriam, would repeat this. And they went through and sang the song. Well, throughout their lives, and throughout the wanderings in the desert, they end up probably a good 24 to 48 hours before Moses' death. And in Deuteronomy 31, there's another instance of a song. A lot of it recaps the song that Moses had sung over in Exodus 15. But Moses gives the Israelites very specific instructions. And the instructions are to write down the song, mimic the song, and sing the song. Now, in old ancient traditions, passing down music was one way to pass down their history. So in reality, this was one way to pass down the history of the Israelites moving from Egypt to now the Promised Land, but it was also a way to instruct the Israelites, because Moses not only instructed them to write the words and lyrics out, he also instructed them on how to sing the song and what to use. They used tambourines, which were available instruments at the time. They used lyres, and they were to make what we call now a joyful noise unto the Lord. And as most of us think about music through the Bible, we think about the Psalms and the hymns of our foundation and our faiths. We certainly know that William Billings was key in that, and Dr. Isaac Watts from England was key in making sure that we wrote down this poetry and set it to music. But really, it all comes back to Moses. Moses started in Exodus 15, singing praises to God and having a group of people do it along with him. Moses continues this in Deuteronomy 31, now instructing people on what to do, how to do it, and what to do it with in order to sing praises to God and in order to move their heritage through. So, as we reflect on music educators and music history, as much as we would like to say that music started with the ancient Greeks and Pythagoras' tuning, and music in the Bible was primarily the Psalms of David, we need to go back a little further and talk about Moses and reflect on the idea of singing from the heart and understanding what it is to truly express music and express our expressions through music, and that teach other people to do that. Singing praises to God and having a group of people do it along with him. Moses continues this in Deuteronomy 31, now instructing people on what to do, how to do it, and what to do it with in order to sing praises to God and in order to move their heritage through. So, as we reflect on music educators and music history, as much as we would like to say that music started with the ancient Greeks and Pythagoras' tuning, and music in the Bible was primarily the Psalms of David, we need to go back a little further and talk about Moses and reflect on the idea of singing from the heart and understanding what it is to truly express music and express our expressions through music, and that teach other people to do that. By doing that, Moses was able to lay a foundation for us as music educators and for music for the rest of the world.